Good morning. We're all going to start in about 3 minutes. So looking forward to connecting with all of you. And I'm going to take a quick picture, selfie of the webinar. So here we go. That will go on Instagram. So.
Perfect. So hi everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar brought to you by the Canadian Professional Sales Association. I can see that we still have some attendees joining us, so we'll just get started in a few minutes. Looking forward to that selfie, Shane.
Yeah, I'll tag the CPSA, so that's great. Yeah. I'll tweet it first. There we go.
Perfect. For any of you that have just logged in, we'll get started in a few minutes, just waiting for everyone to sign in.
This whole webinar is just going to be me tweeting, actually. So. That was a free product shot for Starbucks.
And it will be for the whole duration of the webinar, so every time you take a sip.
Exactly.
You can't see me, but I've got the same on this end, so.
Excellent.
Yeah.
I think the sun has finally come up here in Vancouver.
Yeah, it looks way brighter. I can't believe the sun comes up at 8.
Yeah, yeah.
That's crazy. Yeah, we've still got a few people just signing in. Alrighty, so I think we'll just get started then. Hi everyone, and welcome to today's webinar brought to you by the Canadian Professional Sales Association. Please note that you will be able to ask questions at the end of the session using the Q&A function. We'll try our best to answer all questions within our allotted time. You also have access to a fact sheet for this webinar on strategic relationship building in sales. Feel free to download this from the handout section in your dashboard. Today's webinar will give you insight on relationship management and how to build your strongest pipeline. Hosting is Shane Gibson, an international speaker and author on social selling, sales performance, and social media marketing who has addressed over 100,000 people on stages in North America, Southern Africa, India, Dubai, Malaysia, and South America. Shane Gibson is number 5 on the Forbes.com list of top 30 social sales people in the world. Now, without further ado, I'll hand it over to Shane to start.
Excellent.
There you go. Have you got access there, Shane?
Yes, so I will share my main screen. There we go. For some reason you're seeing there we go, perfect. So can everybody here see my slides? I think so. Here we go. So today I've got, in the brief few moments here that we've got to go through this presentation, sales for me has been a lifetime endeavor, so I always find it challenging to squeeze all of this into 45 minutes, but today's focus is really on looking at your funnel and infusing relationship strategy into it. And I think it's really important that business relationships are different than personal relationships. I've had a number of people say to me, hey, you know what, Shane, relationships, it's not enough just to build relationships with clients. And I'd say I'd absolutely agree. And so I wanted to find that a business relationship isn't just about being likable, it's actually about being credible and adding value. So I think if you look in that context, this is what we're talking about today, is how do I add value and credibility to the process in a way that elevates me above my competitors who might be flogging just products or solutions. So to start off with, Trevor Green and I, when we wrote Closing Bigger over a decade ago, looked at a definition for selling that really encompassed not just closing the deal, but the whole sales process. And for us, what we found is that for exceptional salespeople, you could really boil down to what they did as the following, and that's the fact that selling is actually about creating an environment where an act of faith can take place. So selling is about creating an environment where an act of faith can take place. So if we look at it, is that many of us will argue that our decisions are logical, especially in the business buying process. But the reality is although our decisions are logical, the reality is we can never have all the information we need to make the decision. In most cases, we're going to have a certain amount of data and then a certain amount of faith in what the vendor says their product or service will do, or the promises they make on execution. And so it really is, from a sales perspective, about creating an environment where an act of faith can take place. And so when I think about closing big deals, and when I think about big deals, all of us want to close big deals. Doesn't mean it has to be $1-million deals. So when Trevor Green and I went out and interviewed people for our book Closing Bigger, part of that original research was to find people who close deals, 7-figure and above, and say, what do they do different than average salespeople? What we found was that sometimes closing a big deal, if your average deal is 10 grand and you want to close your average deal to be 20,000, that's a big deal for you. For some organizations, $1 million purchase isn't a large purchase, and so it's really contextual. But here's the important part: is when closing bigger deals, is that whenever we're going to a client and we're pushing them to move up out of their comfort zone, maybe committing to a longer-term opportunity, a broader breadth of products and services we have to offer them, or just a larger transaction, there's bigger risk involved for them. There's also bigger investment. It affects more people. And when that happens, it requires more faith, trust, and credibility. So the more perceived risk on the customer's side from purchasing, the more faith, trust, and business credibility you need to build. So it's really important to look at that. So one of the things you'll find in a market, let's say you're in a turbulent market where the economy is uncertain, you'll find that because of that, people will be more risk averse. What that means is that you're going to often have more people involved in the decision. In addition to this, you're going to have to build more faith, trust, and credibility of those individuals. But the whole process for me at enterprise selling and improving my funnel and getting it to move faster and putting larger and more profitable and qualified deals in the funnel all focuses on this concept of building that environment where an act of faith can take place, which is going to come from a strong business relationship. So let's talk about credibility, because I think this is important. So I think about, am I credible with my prospects? Am I truly a credible sales professional or sales organization? And so when I look at credibility, I'd like to define it as this. Number one, it's about being seen as a peer and a business person, not a transaction-focused salesperson. So I'll give you a quick example here, is that client of mine, that's a family business. Actually a very successful family business. It's actually now moving on to the 3rd generation in their family. One of the leading printing companies in Western Canada, supplies government, supplies major industry, and is quite innovative in what they do. the son's taking over the business, and so is the daughter in this business. And the son came to me and said, "Hey, I have a challenge. One of my challenges is I have no problem, dealing with our customers that know me." He says, "But when I move into new environments and I'm in the boardroom where I'm dealing with a senior executive, I find I'm having difficulty connecting with them." And so we talked about what it is to be a peer and a business person, not just a transaction-focused order taker or a supplier to senior executives. He says, "I'm not sure how to relate to them." And I said to him, I said, "Well, let's think about what kind of books are they reading? What type of seminars are they attending? What type of areas of interest? What type of government decisions are impacting your decision makers? And you as a sales professional, are you attending the same conferences that these CEOs attend? Are you reading the Harvard Business Review as well? Are you reviewing policy that impacts the industry that you're catering to? Do you really understand it?" And yeah, this big question was, well, I'm selling printing, why does that matter? And what it matters is that you can have conversations with those customers in that context. And then you can frame your product or service in the context of those issues that are really relevant to those senior executives. And so if you want to sell into those markets, you've got to start immersing yourself into the thought process and into the universe that they're in. So that's part of credibility. The other one is asking intelligent questions, which kind of comes from the first part. And so one of the things I can't go into today in great detail, which is very vital, and I've got a whole program I do called The Art of Asking Questions, and is that you need to have a good needs analysis approach. And one of the biggest mistakes I find people make in the sales process is they have questions they ask customers, but the questions they ask are to help qualify the customer for them. But the reality is, when we're asking questions, is it enables us to actually qualify us for the customer. In other words, build credibility through the intelligent questions we ask to help them see us as a credible business person, and that we truly understand our business and can go from a pitch artist to actually an advisor. The next one for credibility is doing research. So doing our research on the client, having a natural process for needs analysis, and then being passionate and confident in ourselves, our company, our industry, and our solution. One of the things I'll find is interesting is that I'll find someone who is missing quota, or they're not closing deals. Let's say there's a certain point where they say their boss will say, "Hey, this person's not closing the deal." And I'll go in, and sometimes it's not true. Sometimes when someone says, "My person isn't closing the deal," it's because that actual person maybe isn't qualifying effectively or asking the right questions. But sometimes it is near the tail end where they're not asking for the business. They don't want to push the customer. I don't want to be a pushy salesperson. I don't want to push the timeline here. I don't think they're ready to do business with us, or they're still thinking about it. And when I dig further, what I'll realize is that there's a lack of confidence that they actually have the best solution, or that it's a true 100% value and alignment with the customer wants. And many times I find there's someone beside them who's selling the same types of customers easily. And often the difference is passion and knowledge in what their company and their industry and their solution represents to that client. So if you are lacking certainty, or you're not feeling confident in the solution you're offering, I think you need to go back and ask your senior sales manager, your product team, that passionate salesperson next to you, to sell you on why this is the right solution. Because if you don't believe it, sales is really about the transference of enthusiasm. And if you don't have that enthusiasm and that true conviction, you can't transfer it. And people can smell it. People can sense it. And the last part of credibility is absolutely keeping commitments. So this is the next vital part, is to keep our commitments. One of the reasons why is it's one of the quickest ways. If someone doesn't know you and you even break a small commitment, often it disqualifies us for bigger commitments. Yet if you keep commitments and you actually exceed even the smallest commitments, you can build momentum in those relationships. So here's something interesting. So after all the research that Trevor Green and I did a decade ago, and all of the people I've met since and worked with that close large accounts and work in enterprise sales on 5 continents, here's the thing I realized, that there's one thing you need to know about closing big deals. And I see I've got a question popping up here. I just want to make sure, or a hand. No, I'm okay. Just a little flash. Good thing. So the one thing you need to know about closing big deals is, drum roll, and this for me was both exciting and disappointing, was that there's more than one thing you need to know about closing big deals, or any deal. And so I was always looking for the silver bullet to closing deals. Maybe it's the fact that I need to be a disruptive salesperson. I need to disrupt the way people think. I need to ask these key questions. I need to use this particular software. I need to use this particular method of prospecting. What I've found is that all these things are great, but it's really about your process that closes deals. It's not an event. It's not a tactic. It's a set of principles. So one of them is understanding truly the relationship building model. It's very simple. This particular formula, if we go back to it and really say, are my interactions following this simple formula or model? So this simple formula or model was developed, close to 30 years ago by Bill Gibson, my original mentor and father, and it still holds true today. It actually holds very true even in social selling, and that is that time plus genuine assistance, which in my opinion from the enterprise level is actually business and personal impact, meaning making a true difference and adding value in interactions, equals a relationship, which equals a commitment from both parties. So simple formula, putting time in with someone and frequently interacting with them over time, adding personal and business value to their life. So it's not picking up the phone saying, hi, do you want to buy? How do you want to buy? Or emailing them saying, are you ready yet? Are you ready yet? Or here's our latest product spec sheet. Oh, here's the latest awesome thing we did in the community. That's about us. And they don't really care. The customer is often asking, what's in it for me and what's unique about you? And so from this perspective, this simple formula is how frequently am I interacting with my ideal clients, and how am I adding business and personal impact? How am I impacting their business, their thought process, their capacity, and not just with my product or service, but even introductions, even introducing third-party vendors and other consultants or organizations that can help them, and just improving their business overall. So I'm going to throw up two quotes here. And I think this is interesting, is I'll throw this quote up in front of an audience and say, okay, what do you think of this? I'll say, if two people like and respect each other, the details of the transaction will look after themselves. And most people will say, oh, that's really nice, Shane. That's kind of cute. You're from the West Coast. That sounds about right. But that's not really bottom line. That's nice, but it's not necessary. And I'll throw it around and say, well, what do you think of this? Which is the same thing, just stated in the negative. And that is, if two people do not like and respect each other, the details won't matter because there probably won't be a transaction. So when someone says relationships don't matter or likability doesn't matter, I'd argue quite the opposite. Is that especially if you're a commodity-based business where you're competing and people are really seeing it as an apples-to-apples scenario, that often the only differentiator you have is the relationship and the customer buying experience, which is largely driven by likability. So if they don't like us and we don't respect each other, there probably won't be a deal. So we need to start with that. So I often look at, when I ask people, I'll say, look, what do you or would you expect or want from someone close to long-term relationship? So spouse, a significant other, boyfriend, girlfriend, son, daughter, business partner, and we'll brainstorm all these different things. And what will come up will often be trustworthiness, commitment, attraction, of course, in many cases, rapport, humor, long-term thinking, similar values, and the list goes on. And so they'll list these things, and then I'll ask them very quickly, I'll say, what would you expect or want from a long-term business relationship? And people will say things like long-term commitment, adding value, likability, trustworthy, knowledgeable. And what's interesting is often what we want from a long-term personal relationship and what we want from a long-term business relationship, there's about an 80% overlap on the personality level from this perspective. And so when someone says to me, well, I'm not sure how do I build strong relationships with my clients? And often I laugh and say, you already possess that strategy. If you've built strong personal relationships in your life with people in your community, in your family, or intimate relationships, you actually possess 80% of the skill set you require to build strong relationships with clients. You just need to add on that business credibility. And stop labeling it as business, but think of the fact that it's like Jeff Booth, the founder of Build Direct, said to me one day, and this was about social media marketing, is it's not B2B, business to business, or P2P, or B2C, business to consumer. It's actually P2P, person to person. At the end of the day, when you pick up the phone or you send an email or a tweet or LinkedIn message, there's a human on the other end of that, and it is about personal relationships. So this was a study done a number of years ago. There was a national account buyer survey in the Journal of Business and Industrial Marketing, and they actually asked procurement officers, people who are actually kind of certified procurement officers, buyers in major organizations, many of them able to write checks for $1 million or more without even going upstairs, so to speak. And they said, what's important to you when selecting a vendor? Somebody who's going to be doing business with you for the long term. Not a one-time purchase, but let's say you're trying to find a new POS supplier, or maybe you're a building supply company and you're looking for a new lumber supplier, or you're a utility company, you're looking for somebody to build new towers for you for the next 5-10 years. What are you looking for in that from that vendor to qualify them for a long-term relationship? And so this is what they said. There was 8 major things, and this whole study is quite in depth, so I can't go to it in great deal today with just 45 minutes plus a question period. But I want to kind of make you aware of these things, and in your mind go, am I displaying these things? In the first couple meetings with a customer or potential customer, am I displaying these things? So first thing is a long-term perspective. They said that sales professionals who interact with me have a long-term perspective. So they're really able to display to me and show how their product or service, organization, and themselves can impact us positively in the long term. And they're able to articulate that and help me map that out. Honesty. So honesty is a big one. And honesty is about even disclosing or being vulnerable around some of your product's limitations and capabilities. Number 3 is post-sales support and ongoing engagement. And so after I purchase, is the deal done and I don't hear from them until they renew, a week before my annual renewal? Is that when they reach out? Or are they engaging with me all year long, even when I'm not ready to purchase, to develop a relationship, add value, and really embed themselves in my organization? Number 4 is creative problem solving. Is this sales professional and the team they're connected to providing me with creative options? Are they helping me solve some of my most challenging problems? Number 5 is, do they understand my needs? So are they giving me a generic solution? If you're selling software as a service and you're doing demos with customers, and the first thing you do is jump into the software demo before you ask key questions about their business and interact with them specifically about their region, their industry, and their personal stage of business growth, or are you just giving everybody the same presentation? So if we do that, we're not going to display that we understand their needs. So really, truly understanding their needs, which boils down to what we talked about before, which is things like research and interviewing multiple influencers in that organization. Number 6 is to know our product capabilities. So in other words, what are all the ways our product or service can impact their business, and what are the limitations? Number 7, understanding their business. So understanding their needs is a little bit different than understanding their business. Do you understand their industry? Do you speak their language? Are you going to their events? Do you have a track record in the space? And then lastly was always meet commitments. And this was interesting, this comes up almost in every study I've seen studying long-term business relationships, is that commitment factor. Here's what I think. Most people are generally lousy at meeting commitments. Most people miss the mark. Most organizations overpromise and underdeliver. And so the ability to actually meet commitments, and because when we don't meet a commitment to a vendor, we create a sense of doubt. We have them wondering and staying up late at night. We have a CFO or CTO wondering, is this technology solution that I've selected going to work? Is this going to cause me grief? Am I going to have the board of directors breathing down my back? Geez, I hope this is going to work. And this creates a level of anxiety or worry. So that's the opposite of creating an environment where an act of faith can take place. That's the opposite of being able to expand revenues and share information. So really, really key piece. So just going through these, are you displaying these 8 things when you're interacting with your customer? So just a bit on honesty. Honesty improves communications. If we're honest with the customer and they feel safe, they'll often share more information with us. When they share more information, we can actually give them better solutions and adapt and adjust to helping them more. We understand them more. That creates better customer service, which creates a stronger buyer and seller relationship, which creates more information sharing and more trust, and the cycle grows. So here's something interesting. This was a study by Gallup talking about engagement, because I talked about engagement earlier on, because we're really talking about once we've landed a client, maybe on a small order, is getting the next bigger order, a long-term commitment. Is that companies that successfully engage their B2B customers realize a 63% lower customer attrition and a 55% higher share of wallet and a 50% higher productivity than those that don't engage them. And engagement by Gallup had a number of areas they defined it. And so I think it's really important to look at it is that this is how they looked at engagement. Engagement was in essence impact, the ability to impact their business positively. And so here's the Ed O'Boyle, the global practice leader for this large study they did, found, this was of like several hundred organizations, said help customers improve their performance. The most relevant the improvement, the more successful the partnership, because the relationship shifts from one of price to one of advice. And sometimes it doesn't mean you have to do groundbreaking things to have a strategic impact. Sometimes for me, it's the fact that I found a study that's relevant to the industry this CEO I've dealt with recently. And I picked up the study. I may have even paid for the study. Maybe the study's a grant, and I gift it to them. And this is a large account of mine. And by providing this insight or this advice, maybe it's not even my own, but strategic business impact that changes the way they think and do business, it opens the door for more business for me. So impact. Here's what the four big takeaways in the study done by Gallup. This is how we had really impact them. Is number one, allow the customer to use our products and services more efficiently or effectively. So this is where customer success. We've heard of this team called customer success in a sales organization, or sometimes it's often part of our job as a salesperson to help a customer implement our solution. But too often it's reactive. It's here's our customer service desk, or I'm going to call you and say how's it going. Instead, do you have a best practices playbook and process that you teach your customers to implement the use of your products and services? How good is your product use training? How good is maybe your consulting to assist a customer in implementing a complex solution? Number two is identify unseen product or service opportunities. Something really interesting. I have a client out of the U.S. They're a capital equipment manufacturer for the food industry. And so one of the things they did is they integrated Internet of Things into their machines. And what this means is that the machines have all these data points that are supplied back to their office, so that if you're running this machine not 10 hours a day, but 15 or 16 hours a day, or you notice there's a certain wear and tear in a certain region in a certain machine, they're actually proactively notified by their software, and they can actually reach out and say, hey, I noticed in this factory, you're running the machines this long. What that means is, A, you're probably a bit over capacity, B, you're going to run into some challenges with these parts earlier than we stipulate in the warranty. Here's how I can help you. And so sometimes even identifying unseen product or service opportunities is looking competitively at what their competitors are doing and giving them strategic advice on how to adjust. Number three, enhance the customer's standing in the marketplace and thus potential for future growth. So anything we can do to, again, give them that competitive advantage. Number four, have some broader effect on the customer's cost structure, perhaps through more effective supply chain management, inventory control, or process improvement. So these are all things that if we can do to help the customer, these are examples of engagement or business value we can add. And so it's not just enough to sell someone a product or service, it's really about helping them realize return on investment on that solution. And so often you don't get to build a large valuable account, you often don't get the deal all up front. You often have a little deal or a mid-sized deal or a regional deal, which leads to a larger implementation. And so from this aspect, it's really important to think about what is your customer success playbook? How do you help them succeed using your product or service? So here's something also interesting. So CEB, and CEB, of course, is at this point, the leading or second largest sales research organization in the U.S. And they did a study of, several thousand, I think it was close to 5,000 sales managers and salespeople, and then looked at their customers and said, what really drives loyalty? So more than price, more than value, customers want to be made smarter in their sales interactions. 53% of customer loyalty is driven by a salesperson's ability to deliver unique insight to the customer. So it is about being a resource. And that insight is about the ability to not just take orders and say, hey, what do you want? And ask them questions and say, okay, this is the solution you want. Here's what I can supply to you. But say, hey, I think you said you wanted this, but based upon what you've shared with me and what I see happening in the marketplace, here's a couple areas of risk you have with that type of thinking. And here's what we can provide to help you avoid that risk in a unique way. And being able to provide the type of insights to a customer, having the confidence to actually step in and sometimes interrupt the way they think and provide maybe a contrarian view that helps drive their business, we can establish ourselves as an advisor versus just an order taker. Remember, if you want to build a good business relationship, it's like a personal relationship. It's not just about nodding your head when your friend tells you what they're up to. Sometimes it's saying to your friend, hey, whoa, can I give you a bit of feedback here? I think you're going down the wrong path. Let me help you. So kind of summarizing here on this piece is some of the keys to building long-term relationships are, number one, having a long-term perspective. Two, and this means really understanding their timelines and their strategic business goals. Number two is integrity. Number three is talking to them more frequently. So in order to build that relationship, to have that time plus genuine assistance model, we need to be talking to them more frequently. Number four is talking in greater depth to gain understanding of what's expected. So in order to provide great disruptive insights to customers that build value, you first have to ask them questions and dig deep into their organization and truly understand them. And then the last one is good product, industry, and customer knowledge. So it isn't just about showing up with a great pitch. It's actually about doing your homework, both on the relationship side and the business value and industry side. So one of the things that's interesting is this model we developed a number of years ago working with BMW Fleet in South Africa and the Siemens Industry and Transport Division in the Southern Hemisphere. And what we did for these clients is we actually helped them build a large account management process. And we identified 6 key decision makers or types of buyers and buyer influencers that you should take into account when selling into any type of enterprise. What's interesting is that a recent study by CEB Insights again shows that the average business-to-business decision-making group includes 6.2 buyers. So interesting, we've got 6 here. And so, which means that just a year ago, the number was, a little bit over 5. And so what does that mean? It means that corporations are becoming more like government. They're becoming more inclusive, which is good in many ways, more consensus-oriented, which is great for employees, maybe great for alleviating risk and decision-making, but it also can create paralysis analysis for many organizations where they're not making decisions. And so us as a sales professional, one of our jobs is actually to help them help themselves. It's about actually navigating the network of decision makers and giving them all what they need to move a deal forward and identifying who they are. So I can't go into great detail with this. We could spend an afternoon just on these power players identifying where they are and some of your key clients when we're building account plans together. But I'm going to kind of give you an idea of what I like to identify in any complex sales solution or any corporate purchase. So I want to identify these 6 characters. Number 1 is the navigator. So navigator is a person who won't sell for you, but they understand the lay of the land. They understand the politics in the organization. They'll often understand the buying process. They'll understand who's for and against you. They may understand the RFP process or who's helped them write it. They'll understand who's also bidding for that deal or who the incumbent suppliers are and what their history is. And this person will often share this information with you for a couple reasons. One, it might advance their career in some way or help their division of the company. Or altruistically, they feel that what you're offering is going to help their organization. But they won't sell for you, but they'll give you good advice. So this navigator could be the vice president of a different division. The navigator could be one of the users, maybe a frontline sales professional who has a lot of data for you that could help guide you in how to sell their organization. It could be an external consultant. It could be a past employee. It could be the executive assistant to the CEO. But it's somebody who's willing to navigate. And so I'm often looking for a navigator in any deal to give me the lay of the land. So often there's something in it for them, like I said, either personal gain or maybe an altruistic reason for them doing it. But identify your navigator. Then the second person or persons is the ruler. This is the decision maker or group of decision makers who make the final decision. these are often senior executives or a group of senior buyers. And so one of the things about this group is you'll often only have one chance to get in front of them. It's often through a peer introduction or during a final or near final presentation. One of my suggestions to get to these people sooner is I often suggest to sell the other people within the network. Let's say you're dealing with the protector or maybe even a group of users who's introduced you to within the organization to the concept of a needs analysis that's a 360. So often when I do a needs analysis, I say, great, I'd like to do needs analysis, I'd like to do it with your salespeople, but also senior sales management to understand their perspective, and even your CEO or company owner if possible, so I have a holistic view of your organization before I propose a solution. And then what that allows me to do is actually get in front of the ruler earlier on. So one of the things to also realize is that the rulers tend to be big picture and bottom line. And so if you bog them down with too many details, they'll often feel it's a waste of time, or you'll put them on the spot. Often the details come from the people they've hired, not from them. They're making large, big picture decisions. And so be careful with this, because I did this one time where I grabbed a CEO and I asked them very specific questions in front of a couple of their team members about how their call center operated and the technology they used and what their actual return on investment was of this solution and what the revenues were in this region, and they didn't have the exact answers, and I actually embarrassed them. And what happened is I never got the deal. I never got the opportunity to get the second deal. So it's really important is to keep big picture and bottom line and results focused when you're dealing with a ruler. Then the next person in a complex sale is the user. This is the actual person who either implements or uses your solution. So if I was selling that capital equipment, if I was that food equipment manufacturer and I was selling that, I would actually be selling it to several groups of people. One user would be the person who runs the factory, the engineer, who's responsible for the factory to run. So they have to implement it. That's one user. But then there's another user who's the end user. That's the person who's actually operating the machinery. So I'd have to really look at these two groups as people I want to pull on side. Now, why this is important is maybe I'm able to sell this equipment to the ruler, but if the user doesn't feel included or heard, they could sabotage the effective implementation, or they could block it and push my competitor in who's they've got a better relationship with. So it's really, really vital that from this perspective that you don't overlook the user. Too often we think, I've got the ruler in my back pocket, I'm dealing with the head of HR, the solution I'm selling, why do I need to deal with the frontline staff? The reason why is they can be A, some of your best sources of information to provide the right solution, B, you want to make sure they're allies and not opposers. Number four, the fourth person is your protector. So your protector is someone who, that's a CTO, that might be a CFO, it might be a procurement officer, might be a lawyer. And these people, even if they like you, they won't say yes unless it logically makes sense for the organization. So you need to have your details, facts, and data loaded up. This person often is the one who writes the RFP for the organization, so the sooner you can get to them and help them write that RFP, it's kind of the better or ideal solution. And lastly, the last two quickly, is your opposer. This person doesn't like you because you look like their brother-in-law, or they want another supplier to get the deal because they're friends with them. Not because it's going to help the organization, but it's going to help their personal interests. Or they don't like you because they don't like the person who brought you in within their organization. So my only advice here quickly is don't oppose opposers. If you oppose an opposer, you're actually, in essence, giving them motivation and fuel to go recruit more opposers. Instead, find ways to either step to their side and neutralize it through relationship developing, or just build a very positive relationship with all the other players and build such leverage that they have to concede. And then lastly, number 6 is the contributor. This is the second salesperson, I like to call them. This person's within the organization. You have a relationship with them. They're willing to take feedback, insights from you, and actually advocate for you within the organization. CEB Insights wrote a book called The Challenger Customer, and this is kind of who this person is. And so identifying this person, establishing a relationship with them is really, really vital. I call this person my internal champion. After I've closed the deal, and I'm providing sales training, I often want to identify an internal champion who's willing to internally drive implementation and sell the solution, because it's needed at every step. So my thoughts are, when you're closing an enterprise level deal, have you identified these players? So most people, and this is a quote from Bill Gibson, is most people use the relationship to get the deal, but the reality is the relationship is the deal. So as you're going through the steps in your sales funnel, there's another series of steps that are also happening, and those are the 5 stages of relationship development. So what I want to share with you is these 5 stages. And one of the things I do is with all 6 of those power players, or just an organization in general, is I want to ask this question: where am I in these 5 stages of relationship development? Because it's vital. And so when I look at this, what I want to look at is I'm going to run these through these with you relatively quickly here, but it's really important is that the first stage of relationship development is the attraction stage. This is the potential supplier, and they're asking 2 questions. What's in it for me? What's unique about you? They're disloyal, they're short-term thinking at this point, and they're price-focused. And so how we move beyond the attraction stage, the exploration stage, is we actually provide, we begin to position ourselves and elevate ourselves from pitch artist to advisor. So if you can show unique insights, if you can show disruptive thinking, if you can show them a different way, if you can add value even at an entertainment level, this often will move us from the attraction stage to the exploration stage. At the exploration stage, this is the short-term supplier. They'll begin to test us. They might test us just by inviting us into our office, seeing if we show up on time, how we present ourselves, or maybe giving us a small RFP or small order to see how we perform. At this stage, the most important thing here is to make commitments, short-term commitments, and exceed them. They won't be willing to make long-term commitments with us or purchases in many cases. So think about what ROI can you show in the short term. Once we qualify in the short term from a performance and commitment perspective, then we move into the development stage. The development stage is where trust begins. If you do a needs analysis at the attraction or exploration stage, your customer won't share all the vital information with you because they don't trust you yet. They might even mislead you a bit because they're not comfortable exposing true challenges and pains. But once they move to the development stage, they start to share information. Once that information is shared, we have a better idea of how we can help them. We are at this stage also, is really important that you share more information with them so they can understand all the ways that you can help their organization. And lastly, you want to focus on establishing more personal interaction and ongoing depth of connection. And so once we move to this development stage, we're able to get more information, provide better solutions, get them results, and they start to think more long-term and larger in their purchases. And then we move to the commitment stage. This commitment stage is where we're often the supplier of choice. There might be some other suppliers there, but we got most of the business. At this point, they're no longer price-focused or just testing the relationship like they are in the development stage. They're now solution and long-term focused. And then lastly, we move into the unity stage. And this stage, it doesn't happen with every organization, but this is where you need them as much as they need you and vice versa. And so this is truly where it's a true partnership between you and them. So we all probably have a customer that if we left today and walked away from them, that their business would be in trouble. So our solution or our product is almost embedded in the organization. So you can't be at these stages of relationship development with everybody, but my goal is always to get everybody to the development stage at least and beyond. The reason why is if I can get you at a stage 1 or 2, the customer begins to think longer term. They think less about price, they think more about value and relationships, and they're harder for my competitors to take away from me. And they make larger purchases. So my question always is where am I at in my stages of relationship development, and what do I have to do to move them to the next stage? So the most important piece here is not where you see the relationship is, but actually where they see it is. So it's about testing to see what their thinking is. Are they thinking long-term? Are they sharing good information? Do they see me as a trusted advisor? What's the frequency of purchases? What's my percentage of wallet share? All these things tell me where I'm at. And the next question, of course, is how do I move to the next step? So I'm going to wrap up with this last piece here, and then we'll move to questions in a few minutes. And that is one of the best ways to grow a relationship is nurturing leads, nurturing the relationship. And this process is really about what I talked about earlier, just simply time plus genuine ongoing assistance and interaction. And that's really all lead nurturing is it's adding value over business value over a series of interactions over time consistently. So here's some stats for you to show how important this is. Number one, nurtured leads make 47% larger purchases than non-nurtured leads. And this is a quote by Annuitas Group. According to Forrester Research, companies that excel at lead nurturing generate 50% more sales leads at a 33% lower cost per lead. That's the Demand Gen report. Serious Decisions found this as well, that 80% of prospects that don't make the grade today will go on to buy from someone within the next 24 months. So why is that important? Too often, I think more deals are lost not because we've got bad prospects, but because we've got bad follow-up, because we're so short-term thinking that I've got a quota for this quarter that we don't think that, hey, in 24 months from now, I as a sales professional organization am going to need this business as well. It's worth staying in touch and adding value. So, you know, if I look in your CRM today, does every prospect you've interacted have a next step booked? I don't care if it's in 3 or 6 months from now. Is there a next step book? Because if there isn't, my true belief is you're gonna fall, you know, sort of vulnerable to this. One of your competitors are going to pick up this customer because they followed up with them over the next 24 months. So one of the things I do from follow-up, and this is something that I do, is I brainstorm all the ways I can actually stay in touch with somebody. So for me, if I've got an A category prospect, a real ideal prospect, my 20%er that's going to give me 80% of my business, I schedule a recurring appointment in my CRM, and the one I use is Nimble, and every 3 weeks their name pops up. And I do one of these things. I reach out for an in-person meeting. I figure out where I'm going to, there's a social gathering where I can accidentally on purpose bump into them. I'll pick up the phone. I'll invite them to lunch or dinner. I'll grab a coffee. I'll send them a handwritten card. I'll bump into them at a networking event. I'll attend conferences they're at. I'll send them a personal email. I'll invite them on a hangout. I'll send them a text. I'll have one of my team members contact them. I'll send them a gift or a swag or a book. I'll send them a study. I'll invite them to a trade show. You get where I'm going here is that there's a whole bunch of different ways we can actually reach out and interact with someone over a period of time to stay in touch and add value. And then there's social and digital touches, which is a Twitter interaction, going to their LinkedIn profile, seeing their latest update and entering a comment. Same thing on Facebook, sending them a relevant blog post, a white paper, sharing their update on Facebook or LinkedIn or Twitter, sending them an email or newsletter personally. So maybe it goes out to a list from a marketing team, but I forward it to the CEO and say, hey, this particular part of our email I thought really relevant to your organization. How are things going? Or even a personal video message, which is a great way to break the ice or just say a thank you. So these are, I know I threw a bunch of ideas at you, but the whole goal here is, and this is my summary, is sales is about creating an environment where an act of faith can take place. And that act of faith really comes down to the fact that we're always asking what has to happen to move this relationship to the next step. Focus on moving out of price and into advice. So think about how you engage and add business value even in between the deals and leading up to the deals. It's not just the steps in your sales funnel. Think that there's another funnel going on, and that is the relationship funnel. Stay in touch frequently and add value, and map and work those 6 power players if you truly want to own the deal and protect that client from really being taken over by a competitor, for instance. So I think we'll move to the next step, and that is that's kind of the summary here. To connect, my podcast and blog is at closingbigger.net. You can connect with me on Twitter, LinkedIn. You can email me, shane@shanegibson.com, and that's my personal direct cell number there. But let's open this up to questions. I think Rupalin was going to, I think, take over at this point and feed me some questions.
Thanks so much, Shane. That was great. Anybody who would like to ask a question, please feel free to use the questions function in your dashboard, and then we can go ahead and read it out. First one here, Shane.
Yes.
How do you follow up without coming off as too pushy, which I think is something that people struggle with a lot?
Absolutely, and I think that this is there's 2 ways. Number one, never send an email saying just touching base. Like, you know, there's got to be a business piece of business value or a next step. I think that one of the ways that we follow up without being pushy is we get the commitment to the follow-up before we end the next step. So for instance, if I've met you in your office and I've done a needs analysis, and I'll say, hey, the next step is I'm going to put together an outline of how I think I can work with you in your organization. And what I'd like to do is set a follow-up time for us to meet and review what I feel is going to help you guys. And so, and I'll give them a couple times. Does this time or this time, work to meet? And I'll actually book the next step so that I'm not emailing someone saying, what do you think of my proposal? I'm controlling the sales process. So that's part of it. So if you leave it kind of open-ended, that's where you're starting to chase leads. The other one is that a lot of what I talked about, lead nurturing, is not pushy because it's not about me. It's about how I'm adding value to their organization. So if I know that let's say this client is not ready to purchase yet, and they said, look, call me in the next quarter, then in between now and then, I know I have to stay in touch, but it's not going to be, how do you want to buy? How do you want to buy? You're ready to do this now? Let's talk now. It's going to be me sending information through, insights through, things that help their business. That's going to trigger conversations that hopefully lead to a natural interaction on what our next step is. So there's a couple of things. Number one, close your next step before you finish the one you're on, so that you don't have to run around and chase them for a next meeting or say, so have you reviewed this yet? Because you know when they're going to review it, because you've already made a commitment to your next meeting. And so I think that's kind of really key. I find is that when I feel like I'm bugging someone, it's because I've left it open-ended and didn't get a commitment to our next step. So that's one of the thoughts. And the other one is, if you do a really good needs analysis and someone says, this is really important to my business by this time, I'll email them and say, hey, Fred, I know you said you were starting 4 new salespeople next quarter, and it was really important you got the sales training rolling with them, and we're kind of under a bit of a timeline if we want to start when they start. So if you need to push it back, that's okay, but I just wanted to be cognizant of the timeline you gave me. And so I'll actually kind of throw it back at them that, hey, I'm trying to help you here meet those goals that you brought up with me earlier. Anyway, great question. Bit of a long answer to the question. There's a couple more here. What's another one, Ruplan?
We've got here, could you tell us one of your personal success stories or best practices for lead nurturing?
Absolutely. So I'll give you a quick story, and this was a client I landed a number of years ago. And actually, I'll give you an example. So I'm not suggesting you have to do this at this level, but I had a major brokerage firm in Canada, which you would know if I mentioned it. I had a couple senior executives from that firm. I also, who'd done a ton of business with me, plus I had one of the largest professional designations in Canada, who's got tens of thousands of members, and it wasn't CPSA, but it was another one. And they've been doing a lot of business with me. And one of the things I did with both of these clients is I had just an ongoing monthly lunch that I'd invite them out to. So, and the last things I would do is sit down and talk about their business. In fact, I would ask them how things were going. I would maybe provide some insights on what would work for them, and I would never talk about our next deal. But at the end of the lunch, almost always, just through this monthly meeting, they start to ask me questions about how they can help my business, or what do I think I could do there. And so why I share this is that from a lunch perspective, or any type of meeting, especially if it's supposed to be more social, which is more nurturing, I really make sure that I don't talk about my solutions, that I actually resist the temptation to pitch, but I listen and provide insights. Then the other thing I did is I saw the value these two organizations could have each other. So there was a major festival here in Vancouver called the Hopscotch Festival, which, as you can imagine, is microbreweries, scotch and whiskey, plus kind of great food. And so I bought 4 VIP tickets to this, plus a ticket for myself, and I invited them and their spouses out. I knew they'd enjoy each other, but I also knew they could do business together. So I created this environment where they could meet each other. I spent no time talking about what my organization do for them, but just entertained them and allowed them to connect. Both of those organizations ended up doing business with each other. Both of them are really grateful, and both of them gave me a lot more business the next year. So that's an example of one of those of kind of lead nurturing or rolling out the red carpet. Now I'll give you a more specific example, another one that's more in line with what I shared with you. I had a major insurance company, one of the biggest actually brokerage firms in North America. The senior vice president of sales saw me speak, asked me to send him a proposal. I sent him a proposal, and when he got the proposal, he kind of emailed me back saying, literally, ha ha ha, you have to be kidding. I won't pay that rate for lunch and learn. And I said, that's fine. That was a big no. And I said, would you mind if I stayed in touch? I appreciate you. We can't do business at this time. Would you mind if I stayed in touch and gave you updates on upcoming events and studies I'm involved in that you might find beneficial for your organization? He said, absolutely. So I set that recurring appointment every 3 weeks in my calendar. When his name would pop up, I would send Dave an email with a blog post about Salesforce leadership, or I'd send him an invite to an event, or I would send him a study I found about his industry, or I would ask, or I congratulate him on a new merger or acquisition from their company. And every 3 weeks I would do this. Now Dave didn't say thanks. He didn't reply most of the time. Once in a while he'd say, hey, sorry I can't make it to that event. Thank you for the invite. But literally about every 5th email would be what he responded to. The odd time I'd phone him and say hello, and I bumped into him at like one event that year. But I didn't get a lot of love. But 13 months later, I get a call from Wayne in another division of the insurance company. He says, I need training for 100 plus in my sales team. There's 100 salespeople in his team. And Dave said, you might be the guy. I met with Wayne. I landed the deal. This literally fed me and kept my business rolling for half a year. Then Dave finally said, hey, it worked so well with Wayne, I think I will have you train my team. Then after that, the CEO got to know me, and she hired me to help her with Salesforce management strategy at her level. So the bottom line is that this, after 13 months of no love, it turned into a year and a half of business. And so those are some examples of why follow-up and adding value is so vital. They might not do business today, but boy, I was some happy 13 months later that I continued to follow up. So great question. I think we got room for a couple more questions here.
Yeah. We have a pretty specific one here, but it's really interesting.
Okay.
We have to sell services to hospitals. The end users, beneficiaries of our services, don't seem to communicate with the purchasing department about their needs. This creates the following problem. Purchasing department wants the lowest price, and the end user assumes that purchasing identified all needs and it is all covered regardless of the price, and then demands more than the RFP requested. How would you approach this?
I would really, part of this is the protector, right? And the protector is logical, but they're using a set of criteria that maybe doesn't encompass all valuable logic. So one of the things I would do is, in talking to the protectors, is make sure I actually have the protectors. Make sure within that power player network that you might need to move upstream to a group of rulers above them who are setting policy for their budgets, for instance. But in addition to that, one of the questions I ask somebody who's only price focused and really not value focused, I say, let's define the difference between cost and price. Because there's a cost to purchasing something and there's the actual price. So there's an inherent cost to purchasing a cheaper solution that actually exposes your organization to risk, that costs more to replace, that causes more issues in the long term. So whatever the cost is of not doing business with you, there's a cost to buying a cheaper product. A cheaper product is always a race to the bottom. The reason why we don't want to compete on price only is someone who's got a cheaper product, less valuable, less integrity, less product or less customer service, they can actually beat us if we compete on price. So what we need to do with the protector, in my opinion, is to really look at the business value of doing business with us. What's the ROI they have, the tangible ROI? What's the long-term cost savings, the organizational benefit? But also, have I truly defined the cost of using the other solution, the cheaper competitor? Because once they see that there's actually a loss attached to that, the product doesn't seem so cheap. So without really understanding your solution fully, it's harder for me to fully articulate that. But the other big one, of course, is if you don't have it, I'm assuming you do, is really look at happy customers, other hospital groups that have implemented your solution, and doing some deep studies with them, actually doing some research on the return on investment and the shift between cost and value that they've realized. So that would be kind of one of my perspectives. I would even network within your network. Sometimes I've done this where some of the decision makers may be connected to people that I'm connected with on LinkedIn that might be able to get them to look at things a bit differently. So I know that's not maybe based upon the context of what you've given me today, that's some of my thoughts. But I'm sure if I knew specifically your solution and roll up our sleeves, we might be able to come up with something more specific. But that's kind of one of my thoughts there.
I think I have room for a couple more. The next one here is, how important is customer FaceTime versus just touching base? And is there a benchmark for optimum amount of customer FaceTime percentage of time per week?
Yeah, so it's always about your bandwidth in many cases. So I would personally like to just have FaceTime with all of my customers all the time, but I've only got so much time in a day. So I've got to look at my A, B, and C level clients. My A's are my 20%ers that give me 80% of my business. They're my high value customers. So I'm going to be more high touch with them. I'm going to actually have more frequent personal interaction. As I go down the opportunity pyramid and they're less profitable or smaller, I have less FaceTime. So I do that based upon the potential or existing revenues and opportunities from that deal. And then realize that, yeah, so that would be my answer. Number one is then you just look at your available time. And so you've got to almost map it out from a time management perspective and say, how many A's can I see face-to-face in a month without jeopardizing the rest of my sales process? But ideally, there's no real ideal ratio. I mean, it also depends, like 50% of my clients are in Vancouver, and the other 50% are spread out through the globe. And so obviously, the cost per acquisition or cost for client management for me to hop on a plane and go to Austin, Texas and visit a client there means that I'm only going to see them face-to-face quarterly. Whereas my Vancouver-based clients, I want to face-to-face monthly with them. But as much as possible, that would be my suggestion. But also, with that said, some people are more prone or more open to face-to-face than others. I got some clients who just are bottom line oriented. They're not that relationship oriented. They're busy people. I'm a nice to have supplier. I'm not a vital supplier. And so from that perspective, they're not going to want to spend a lot of FaceTime with me, and I better have something really good if I'm going to meet them FaceTime. I got other clients where we got a good relationship. I'm really important to their business operations. I can spend a lot more personal time with them. So, but if you can't do it in person, at least do a Skype video call instead of a phone call if you can with your distance clients, because video is the most like being in person you can be without being in person. And there's something to seeing their reaction and their facial expression and that eye contact even though it's digital, that makes a big difference.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Shane, for that great discussion. So, of course, on behalf of the CPSA, we'd like to thank you, Shane, and our audience for attending today's webinar. Please note, should you have any questions at all, please contact salessuccess@cpsa.com. For those of you who would like a video copy of this webinar, please stay tuned, as this will also be emailed to you shortly. And please also take note, you have the handout created by Shane Gibson connected to this email under handouts, so please feel free to download that before the end of this call. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us, and Shane, thank you so much again.
Hey, thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you.